In 1815, one family invented a financial system so powerful that it's still the blueprint for how modern banks operate today. They didn't do it with armies or gold mines. They did it with information, networks, and a strategy no one had ever seen before. This is the story of how the Rothschilds built the infrastructure that connects every bank on Earth. Before we talk about the Rothschilds, we need to understand what banking looked like before them. In the 1700s, finance was local, slow, and fragmented. If you wanted to move money from London to Vienna, you needed physical transport, gold coins loaded onto carriages guarded by armed men traveling for weeks. Risk was enormous. Theft, accident, war. Any of these could wipe out a fortune in transit. There was no swift communication, no unified system, and no trust between distant institutions. Banking families existed. The Medicis in Italy had pioneered early systems centuries before. The Fuggers in Germany had financed emperors, but their networks were limited by geography and the speed of horses. Then came Mayer Amschel Rothschild. Born in 1744 in the Frankfurt Jewish ghetto, he started as a coin dealer and money changer. The breakthrough came when he cultivated relationships with European nobility, particularly Wilhelm IX, Landgrave of Hesse-Kassel, one of the wealthiest princes in Europe. Mayer didn't just handle transactions, he provided financial intelligence, investment opportunities, and discretion. And most importantly, he had 5 sons: Amschel, Salomon, Nathan, Kalman, and Jacob. In the early 1800s, Mayer made a decision that would change financial history. He sent his sons to establish banks in 5 major European cities: Frankfurt, Vienna, London, Naples, and Paris. One family, 5 capitals, one coordinated network. This wasn't just expansion, it was a structural innovation. Each brother operated independently in his city but communicated constantly with the others. They used couriers, coded messages, and later carrier pigeons to share information faster than any government or competitor. When a client in London needed to pay someone in Vienna, the Rothschilds didn't ship gold. They simply credited accounts across their network. A promise in London became spendable money in Vienna almost instantly. It was the precursor to modern wire transfers, the foundation of correspondent banking, and the beginning of the international financial system we use today. But information speed was only part of the advantage. The Rothschilds also invented new financial instruments. The most important was the sovereign bond market. Before them, governments borrowed from individual wealthy lenders or squeezed their populations through taxes. The Rothschilds pioneered the idea of selling government debt as tradable securities to a broad investor base. This allowed nations to raise massive sums quickly by tapping markets across Europe. The first major test came after the Napoleonic Wars, when European governments were desperate for reconstruction funds. The Rothschilds arranged loans for Britain, Prussia, Austria, and even France, turning national debt into liquid, tradable assets. Let's talk about Waterloo, because this moment reveals how information networks create financial power. On June 18, 1815, Napoleon faced the Duke of Wellington at Waterloo. The outcome would determine Europe's future. Nathan Rothschild, based in London, had established a private intelligence network of agents and couriers faster than any governments. He received confirmation of Napoleon's defeat a full day before the British government did. The popular myth says he used this to manipulate the bond market, selling British bonds to trick others into thinking Britain lost, then buying them back at crashed prices when the truth emerged. But historians have debunked this. What actually happened was more significant. Rothschild knew the result early, yes, but he used that information to stabilize the bond market, not crash it. He reassured investors, prevented panic, and facilitated the post-war recovery. The real lesson wasn't insider trading. It was that information infrastructure, knowing things first and faster, was the foundation of financial power. And this infrastructure became the family's core competitive advantage. While other banks waited for postal services and official dispatches, the Rothschilds had private couriers and intelligence networks that functioned like an early version of Reuters or Bloomberg. Governments began to rely on them, not just for loans, but for information. If you wanted to know the creditworthiness of a foreign nation, you asked the Rothschilds. If you needed to move gold across borders during wartime, you used their network. They became indispensable because they solved problems no one else could. By the 1820s and 1830s, the Rothschild network financed the infrastructure of the Industrial Revolution: railways, mines, and factories. Railways in particular were a perfect match for their model. Building a rail line required enormous upfront capital, crossed multiple countries, and took years to generate returns. The Rothschilds arranged bond issues, coordinated international investors, and used their influence to secure government support. They financed railways in France, Austria, and across Europe, quite literally building the physical networks that connected the continent, just as their banking network connected its capital. Now, it's important to understand they were not alone. Other banking families played similar roles. The Barings in London financed the Louisiana Purchase and much of Latin American independence. The Hopes in Amsterdam funded global trade. The Perret brothers in France competed directly with the Rothschilds in railway financing. What set the Rothschilds apart wasn't secrecy or conspiracy, it was operational excellence. They had better information, faster execution, and a coordinated multinational, structured decades ahead of anyone else. They were the first truly global bank. But this dominance had limits. By the late 1800s, the world changed. Joint stock banks, publicly traded institutions like Deutsche Bank, Credit Lyonnais, and J.P. Morgan, began to eclipse the old family banking houses. These new institutions had access to far more capital through public markets and weren't constrained by family wealth. Governments also began developing central banks with monopolistic control over currency and credit. The Rothschilds adapted by transitioning from sovereign lending to private investment, corporate finance, and asset management, roles they still play today. But the age of a single family dominating European state finance was over by 1900. The system they helped create had grown beyond them. So what did they actually create? Three foundational pillars of modern finance. First, the correspondent banking network. Today, when you transfer money internationally, your bank doesn't ship cash. It credits and debits accounts across a network of partner institutions, exactly the Rothschild model. Second, the sovereign bond market. Government bonds are now the bedrock of global finance, the safest assets in portfolios, the benchmarks for all other lending. The Rothschilds didn't invent bonds, but they built the liquid international market that made them essential. Third, financial information as infrastructure. The insight that early accurate information is more valuable than gold itself became the basis for every Bloomberg terminal, every credit rating agency, every market data service that exists today. But let's address the myths directly, because this family has been surrounded by conspiracy theories for 2 centuries. The most persistent is that they secretly control central banks, governments, or the global money supply. This is false. Central banks are state institutions with transparent governance. The Rothschilds were influential in the 1800s, yes, but so were the Barings, the Hopes, the Fuggers before them, and J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller, and others after them. Financial power is never static. It shifts with technology, politics, and innovation. Claiming one family controls the system ignores how finance actually works, through competition, regulation, and constant evolution. Another myth, that they funded both sides of every war for profit. The reality is more mundane. Banks lend to governments. During the Napoleonic Wars, Britain and its allies were clients. During later conflicts, various European states borrowed from various banks: Rothschild, Baring, Hope, and others. This wasn't a conspiracy, it was business, and it wasn't unique to them. The Fuggers financed both the Habsburgs and their rivals in the 1500s. The Medicis lent to opposing Italian city-states. This is what banks do. They provide capital to anyone creditworthy, regardless of politics. The question worth asking is not about control or conspiracy, but about innovation. How did this family, starting from a ghetto in Frankfurt, become the most successful banking dynasty of the 19th century? The answer is structure. Mayer Amschel Rothschild built a family firm with strict rules. Sons inherited the business, daughters married into allied banking families, and information was shared internally but guarded externally. This created trust, speed, and coordination that no competitor could match. They operated as a single organism across 5 countries, an early multinational corporation when such things didn't exist. They also benefited from timing. They rose during the Napoleonic Wars, a period when traditional power structures collapsed and new fortunes could be made. They thrived during the Industrial Revolution, when massive capital was needed to build railways, factories, and infrastructure. And they adapted when the world moved toward central banking, regulation, and public markets. Survival in finance requires constant reinvention, and the Rothschilds managed it, not through secrecy, but through evolution. Today, Rothschild & Co. still exists as a global advisory and wealth management firm. It's a successful business, but it doesn't dominate global finance. That role has passed to institutions like Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan Chase, BlackRock, firms operating at scales the 19th century Rothschilds never imagined. But the systems they pioneered remain. When you wire money across borders, trade government bonds, or rely on financial information networks, you're using infrastructure they helped invent. The lesson here is about the nature of power in finance. It's not granted by birthright or conspiracy. It's built through innovation, execution, and adapting to change. The Rothschilds didn't control the world. They built a better system than anyone else at a time when the world needed it. And that system became the foundation for everyone who came after. The system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed, just not for you. If you want to understand who really holds power, subscribe. The patterns are all there. You just need to know where to look.